London, 1847. The gaslight flickered against the damask wallpaper of the Prescott family drawing room, casting long shadows that seemed to dance with the same nervous energy that consumed Lady Elara Prescott. "It is decided, then." Her father's voice, Lord Gareth Prescott, was a hushed rumble, sealing her fate to the Duke of Blackwood by month's end. Elara closed her eyes, willing herself not to shatter like the delicate porcelain figurines that adorned the mantelpiece. Behind her, Lord Gareth cleared his throat, the sound harsh in the tension-filled room. "The papers were signed this morning, Elara. You are to be the Duchess of Blackwood." Elara turned, her emerald eyes pleading. "Father, surely there must be another way?" "The rumors about the Duke are merely that, rumors," interjected Lady Rowena Prescott, Elara's mother. She adjusted her perfect posture on the settee, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her expensive gown. "The Duke's offer is most generous. The connection to Blackwood will elevate our family's position immeasurably." "At what cost?" Elara dared to ask. Lord Gareth's expression hardened. "The Duke has requested your hand specifically, Elara. He has never shown interest in any other young lady of society. Surely that should flatter you." "Flatter me, father? They say he never leaves Blackwood Keep except on the darkest of nights. They say servants disappear without explanation. They say he is a monster." "Enough!" Lady Rowena's fan snapped open with alarming force. "Such gossip is beneath you, Elara. The Duke is eccentric, perhaps, but his lineage is impeccable and his fortune vast. Our family will want for nothing." A knock at the door interrupted them. The family butler, Simmons, entered with a silver tray bearing a small package wrapped in dark blue velvet. "A delivery from Miss Prescott, my lord, from Blackwood Keep." All eyes followed the package as Simmons presented it to Elara. With trembling fingers she unfolded the velvet to reveal a small wooden box of exquisite craftsmanship. When she opened it, a collective gasp filled the room. Inside lay a ring unlike any Elara had ever seen. Not the expected diamond, but a deep blue sapphire surrounded by smaller diamonds that glittered like captured stars. Beneath it was a folded piece of parchment bearing a seal of dark red wax, impressed with the Blackwood crest. "Read it," Lady Rowena urged, curiosity temporarily overcoming decorum. Elara broke the seal and unfolded the note. The handwriting was bold, angular, unmistakably masculine. "Lady Elara, I offer this sapphire as a symbol of our impending union. It has adorned the hand of every Duchess of Blackwood since the reign of Elizabeth I. Tradition dictates that I should present it to you in person, but circumstances make this impossible at present. Know that while this arrangement may seem precipitous, it was not entered into lightly. I have observed you from afar, and believe you possess qualities that Blackwood has lacked for too long. I shall await you at the altar on the appointed day. Alaric Radcliffe, Duke of Blackwood." No words of affection, no romantic platitudes, just cold, practical information delivered with aristocratic efficiency. Elara felt her future closing in around her like the walls of a beautifully appointed prison. "How pragmatic," Lady Rowena commented, disappointed by the lack of sentiment. Lord Gareth nodded approvingly. "The Duke is a man of business, not flowery words. This bodes well for the management of both our estates." Elara said nothing, but her eyes met Bethany's across the room. Her lady's maid, Bethany, moved silently in the corner, pretending not to hear as she arranged fresh flowers. But Elara caught her sympathetic glance, a shared acknowledgement of her terror, perhaps the only person who truly cared for her happiness above all else. The weeks that followed passed in a blur of preparations. Seamstresses fluttered around Elara like butterflies, creating a trousseau fit for a duchess. Etiquette instructors drilled her on the proper behavior expected of someone of her eminent rank. Trunks were packed with her belongings, ready for the journey to Blackwood Keep, a place that grew more forbidding in her imagination with each passing day. Throughout it all, Elara maintained a facade of calm acceptance, but inside her dread intensified. Each night, she would stare at the sapphire ring, now on her finger, wondering about the man who had chosen her without so much as a proper conversation. 3 days before the wedding, as Bethany arranged her hair for a final dinner with her family, Elara finally broke her silence on the matter. "What if I simply ran away?" she whispered. Bethany's hand stilled in her mistress's copper-colored tresses. "And go where, my lady? Anywhere? My cousin in Bath, perhaps? Or to the continent?" Bethany resumed her work, securing a pearl pin. "With what funds, if I may be so bold, and how long before you were found?" "The Duke has resources beyond imagining." "You think he would pursue me? A man of his position, publicly abandoned at the altar? Without question." Elara's shoulders slumped. "Then I am truly trapped." Bethany moved to face her mistress, a rare breach of servant protocol. "My lady, may I speak freely?" Elara nodded. "My mother served at Blackwood Keep when the previous Duke was alive. She said the current Duke was not always as fearsome as people claim." Elara's eyes widened. "What happened to change him?" "That she would never say. Only that there was a great tragedy when he was younger, something that transformed him." Bethany hesitated. "Perhaps, my lady, beneath the rumors lies a man capable of kindness still." "You truly believe that?" Bethany adjusted a final strand of Elara's hair. "I believe that fear makes monsters of shadows, my lady, and sometimes the most frightening facades hide the deepest wounds." The evening before her departure for Blackwood Keep, Elara found herself alone in the family library, seeking solace among the familiar books of her childhood. The door opened quietly, and her father entered, looking uncharacteristically hesitant. "I thought I might find you here," Lord Gareth said, approaching slowly. Elara closed the volume in her lap. "I was just remembering happier times." Her father sighed heavily, taking the seat opposite her. "I know you believe I've sold you to a monster for social advancement, Elara, haven't you?" The question held more sorrow than accusation. "The Duke's reputation is complicated, but not all rumors tell the full truth." Lord Gareth leaned forward. "Before I agreed to this match, I made inquiries of my own. His tenants speak of a fair landlord who never raises rents unreasonably. His business associates describe him as honorable, if intensely private. And his solicitor, with whom I negotiated the marriage settlement, insisted that the Duke had been most generous in his provisions for you." "Then why does society fear him so?" Elara asked. "People fear what they do not understand, and the Duke has made himself deliberately unknowable." Lord Gareth hesitated. There was indeed a tragedy in his past, one that changed him profoundly. But that does not make him cruel. Elara studied her father's face, searching for reassurance. "You truly believe I will be safe with him?" "I would never send my daughter to a man I believed would harm her," Lord Gareth replied, unexpected emotion roughening his voice. "This match may not be the love match you dreamed of, but I believe it offers you security and perhaps, in time, contentment." It was the closest thing to an apology she would receive. Elara nodded, accepting what could not be changed. "I shall endeavor to be a dutiful duchess, then." Lord Gareth reached out awkwardly to pat her hand, a rare display of affection. "You have always exceeded expectations, my dear. I have no doubt you will do so again." The carriage journey to Blackwood Keep 2 days later was interminable. Elara watched the landscape transform from the familiar countryside near her family home to increasingly wild, windswept moors. The sky darkened with approaching storm clouds, mirroring her growing apprehension. Bethany, seated opposite her, offered silent support, her presence a steady anchor in the churning sea of Elara's thoughts. At its end rose Blackwood Keep, a massive Gothic structure of dark stone and forbidding spires that seemed to pierce the steel-gray sky. "Give him a chance to be more than his reputation," Bethany whispered as the carriage wheels crunched on the gravel, coming to a halt before massive oak doors. A line of servants emerged, faces carefully neutral, led by an austere-looking woman in black. Lady Elara. The woman greeted with a perfect curtsy. "I am Mrs. Malera Winters, housekeeper of Blackwood Keep. Welcome to your new home." As Elara stepped from the carriage, a shadow moved in an upper window. Tall, broad-shouldered, watching. Then it was gone, leaving her to wonder if her fearful imagination had conjured it. "His Grace awaits your arrival," Mrs. Winters continued, her expression giving nothing away. "The ceremony will take place in the family chapel tomorrow at noon." Elara summoned every ounce of courage as she followed Mrs. Winters into the cavernous entrance hall, where suits of armor stood sentinel, and ancestral portraits stared down with judging eyes. Each step took her closer to her fate, to the mysterious Duke who had claimed her from afar. Tomorrow she would become the Duchess of Blackwood. Tomorrow she would finally meet the man whose very name struck fear into the hearts of London's elite. Tomorrow everything would change. The morning of her wedding dawned gray and misty, as if the heavens themselves were reluctant to witness the union about to take place. Elara stood motionless as Mrs. Winters and two silent maids dressed her in the wedding gown that had arrived mysteriously in her chambers during the night. A creation of ivory silk and delicate lace that fit her perfectly despite never having been measured for it. "His Grace has an eye for detail," Mrs. Winters commented, noting Elara's surprise at the fit. It was the closest thing to personal information about the Duke that anyone had offered since her arrival. "Has he selected everything for today?" Elara asked, trying to keep the tremor from her voice. "The Duke oversees all matters at Blackwood Keep," was the cryptic reply. As the veil was arranged over her face, a gossamer curtain between Elara and the world, she caught her reflection in the ornate mirror. She looked like a ghost bride, pale and ethereal, being prepared for a sacrifice rather than a celebration. "It is time," Mrs. Winters announced precisely at 11. The walk to the chapel felt interminable. Located in the east wing of the vast estate, the sacred space was accessible through a long corridor lined with tapestries depicting ancient battles and hunting scenes. Elara focused on her breathing, on placing one foot before the other, on anything but the man waiting at the end of her journey. The chapel doors opened with a groan that echoed Elara's internal anguish. The space beyond was illuminated by hundreds of candles, their golden lights softening the severity of the stone walls and casting kaleidoscopic colors through the stained glass windows. White roses and lilies perfumed the air, their scent almost overwhelming in the enclosed space. A small gathering awaited, her parents looking both proud and apprehensive, a handful of Blackwood staff positioned discreetly along the walls, an aging vicar with kind eyes that offered silent sympathy, and at the altar, his back to her, stood a figure that could only be the Duke. Alaric Radcliffe turned as the first notes of music announced her entrance. Through her veil, Elara could make out only his silhouette. Tall, imposingly broad-shouldered, standing with military straightness. As she drew closer, details emerged. Raven black hair, features carved with aristocratic sharpness, and eyes. Heavens, his eyes, a piercing blue that seemed to cut through her veil and into her very soul. He was handsome, in a severe, uncompromising way that made her breath catch. Not the soft handsomeness of society dandies, but something harder, more primal. A scar bisected his left eyebrow, lending an asymmetry to an otherwise perfectly proportioned face. His expression revealed nothing as she took her place beside him. The ceremony passed in a blur. Elara heard herself speak the vows as if from a distance, felt the weight of a new ring joining the sapphire on her finger. Throughout it all, the Duke's voice remained steady, deep, and utterly devoid of emotion, as he claimed her as his wife. When the vicar instructed him to lift her veil and kiss his bride, Elara's heart threatened to burst from her chest. This would be their first touch, their first true meeting, of eyes without barriers. Alaric's hands rose with deliberate slowness, lifting the delicate fabric as if unveiling a priceless artwork. When their gazes finally met, unobstructed, Elara was startled by what flashed momentarily in those blue depths. Not cruelty or coldness, but something closer to uncertainty, quickly masked. The kiss was brief, formal, the barest brushing of lips that nonetheless sent an unexpected warmth through Elara's frozen limbs. Then it was over, and she was being led back down the aisle as the Duchess of Blackwood, her hand resting lightly on the arm of a virtual stranger, who was now her husband in the eyes of God and country. The wedding breakfast that followed was a stilted affair in the grand dining room. Alaric sat at the head of the table, Elara to his right, maintaining proper etiquette while speaking little. Lord and Lady Prescott filled the silence with nervous chatter about the weather, the journey, the beauty of Blackwood Keep. Anything to avoid acknowledging the palpable tension. "Your gardens appear quite extensive, Your Grace," Lady Rowena ventured at one point, desperate for conversation. "They are," Alaric replied without elaboration. Lord Gareth cleared his throat. "I understand the Blackwood Library is one of the finest private collections in England." This at least elicited more than monosyllables. "It has been the work of generations. My grandfather was particularly dedicated to its expansion." Elara glanced at her husband, noting how his features softened slightly when speaking of his family. It was the first crack in his forbidding demeanor. "Do you enjoy reading, Your Grace?" she asked, finding her voice at last. Alaric's eyes met hers, surprise evident in them, whether at the question itself, or that she had dared to address him directly she couldn't tell. "I do," he answered after a pause. "It is one of the few pleasures that never disappoints." Something in his tone made Elara wonder what or who had disappointed him in the past. The meal concluded with strained farewells as Lord and Lady Prescott prepared to depart, leaving their daughter to her new life. Lady Rowena embraced Elara with unusual emotion. "Write to us," she whispered. "Often." Lord Gareth shook the Duke's hand with forced joviality. "Take good care of her, Blackwood." "She is my Duchess," Alaric replied with quiet intensity. "She will want for nothing." Again, Elara noted, he spoke of material provisions, not affection or happiness. As her parents, carriage disappeared down the long drive, taking with it her last connection to her former life. Elara felt suddenly, terribly alone. She stood on the steps of Blackwood Keep, now her home, beside a husband who remained as enigmatic as the day she had first heard his name. "You must be tired from the day's events," Alaric said formally, breaking a silence that had stretched between them like a chasm. "Mrs. Winters will show you to your chambers. I have matters requiring my attention in the study." Disappointment mingled with relief in Alara's breast. "Of course, Your Grace." "Alaric," he corrected, a flicker of something indefinable crossing his features. "You are my wife now. You should use my given name, at least in private." "Alaric?" she repeated softly, tasting the name on her tongue for the first time. He gave a curt nod, then hesitated. "The south wing is being renovated. It would be best if you did not venture there for the time being." With that cryptic warning, so reminiscent of the Gothic novels that had once entertained and now haunted Elara, he turned and strode away, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Her chambers were a suite of rooms in the west wing, decorated in shades of blue and cream that should have been soothing, but felt impersonal. Everything was new, selected with obvious care and expense, yet lacking any trace of the woman who would inhabit them. "The Duke had these rooms refurbished entirely for your arrival," Mrs. Winters informed her, a hint of approval in her usually impassive voice. The previous Duchess's chambers had not been used in many years. "The previous Duchess?" Elara inquired, seizing the opportunity to learn something, anything, about the family she had married into. "The Duke's mother passed when he was quite young," Mrs. Winters replied, her tone making it clear that further questions would not be welcomed. Left alone at last, Elara wandered through her new domain, a sitting room with views of the formal gardens, a dressing room filled with gowns she had never seen before, a bathing chamber with modern plumbing that would have delighted her under different circumstances. The bedroom was dominated by a massive, four-poster bed draped in blue velvet. Elara approached it with trepidation, her mind filling with thoughts of the night to come. As Alaric's wife, she knew what would be expected of her. The very idea sent alternating waves of fear and an unexpected, confusing warmth through her body. Hours passed. Bethany arrived with the remaining luggage, her familiar presence a comfort in the strange surroundings. She helped Elara change from her wedding gown into a nightdress of cream-colored silk, another item that had appeared mysteriously in her wardrobe, and brushed out her long copper hair until it shone in the candlelight. "Has there been any word?" Elara asked, both dreading and anticipating her husband's arrival. Bethany shook her head. "The Duke is still in his study, my lady. I mean, your grace." More hours passed. Dinner was served on a tray in her sitting room, a solitary meal that Elara barely touched. Night fell completely, and still Alaric did not come. At nearly midnight, when Elara had resigned herself to spending her wedding night alone, a knock sounded at her door. Her heart leaped to her throat. "Enter," she called, her voice barely audible. The door opened to reveal Alaric, still fully dressed in his wedding attire, his cravat loosened only slightly. He stood on the threshold, not entering, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "Forgive the lateness of the hour," he said formally. "I wish to ensure you were settled comfortably." "Yes, thank you," Elara replied, clutching her dressing gown tighter around herself. "The rooms are lovely." A heavy silence fell between them. Elara waited, her pulse racing, for him to approach, to claim his husbandly rights. Instead, Alaric remained by the door, his posture rigid. "Is there anything you require?" he asked. The question was so unexpected, so at odds with what she had been told to expect from this feared man, that Elara could only stare at him in confusion. Alaric's gaze moved over her, noting her defensive posture, the way she had positioned herself with the bed between them. Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked remarkably like pain. "Are you afraid of me?" he asked quietly. The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. Elara opened her mouth to deny it. A proper wife would surely deny such a thing, but found herself unable to lie. "Yes," she whispered, her honesty surprising them both. Alaric's face hardened momentarily, then settled into a carefully neutral expression. He nodded once, as if her answer had confirmed something he already suspected. "I see." His voice was controlled, revealing nothing of his thoughts. "Then I will bid you good night, Elara." He turned to leave, but paused with his hand on the doorknob. Without looking back at her, he added, "You need not fear that particular obligation of marriage. I will not come to you unless invited." Before Elara could process this extraordinary statement, much less respond to it, Alaric was gone, the door closing softly behind him. She sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind reeling. Every rumor, every fearful expectation had led her to anticipate a very different sort of wedding night. The Duke of Blackwood, the man whispered about in terrified tones throughout London society, had just granted her a choice in the most fundamental aspect of their marriage. Why? What manner of monster offered his frightened bride mercy? Sleep eluded Elara that night. Her mind raced with questions, trying to reconcile the Duke's fearsome reputation with his unexpected mercy. Then, a faint, almost imperceptible melody, like a distant lullaby, drifted through the silent house. It was the haunting tune she'd heard in her dreams. An inexplicable pull, a compelling curiosity, drew her thoughts towards the forbidden south wing. Days bled into weeks at Blackwood Keep, establishing a routine as vast and quiet as the estate itself. Elara, now Duchess Radcliffe, found her life a tapestry woven with threads of formal politeness and profound distance. She rarely encountered Alaric outside of their shared evening meal, a strained affair conducted with impeccable etiquette but minimal conversation. He remained an enigma, polite yet remote, ensuring her comfort materially, always remembering his promise from their wedding night. He would not come to her unless invited. Elara observed him from across the polished mahogany table, noting the furrow in his brow as he reviewed correspondence, the rigid set of his shoulders. He was a phantom, present yet unreachable, his presence a constant reminder of the chasm between them. Yet Elara found herself watching him. In fleeting moments when he believed himself unobserved, the Duke's formidable mask would slip. She noticed the surprising gentleness with which he handled a fragile old book from the library shelves, his long fingers tracing the faded script with an almost reverence. Once, during a rare afternoon stroll in the meticulously kept formal gardens, she saw him pause, his gaze fixed on a distant, overgrown patch of woodland, the forbidden south wing territory, and for an instant A flash of profound, unguarded vulnerability crossed his features before he caught himself, the familiar steel returning to his eyes. These brief glimpses, like fragments of a shattered mirror, only deepened her curiosity, stirring within her a desire to understand the man beneath the Duke's impenetrable armor. Blackwood Keep itself was a house of stark contradictions. While the formal gardens were maintained with obsessive perfection, their roses blooming in vibrant, unnatural symmetry, and the grand library shone with polished wood and gleaming brass, other parts of the estate seemed deliberately neglected. Overgrown paths led to forgotten gazebos, and entire wings were shrouded in a thick dust that spoke of years of disuse. Most notably, the south wing remained an enigma, its windows shuttered, its corridors cloaked in an eerie, palpable silence. When Elara once ventured to inquire of Mrs. Elara Winters about the neglected sections, the housekeeper's impassive face remained unyielding. "His Grace has his reasons, Your Grace," was the only reply, a subtle warning in her tone. Late one night, sleep eluded Elara. The air in her chambers felt heavy, pregnant with unspoken secrets. Then, faint but insistent, she heard it again, the haunting melody. It wasn't a dream this time, but a real, ethereal tune, seemingly woven into the very fabric of Blackwood Keep. It intensified, a siren call pulling her from her bed, wrapping around her with an irresistible, eerie fascination. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum against the silence of the vast house. Against her better judgment, against Alaric's explicit prohibition, she felt an undeniable, compelling pull, drawing her silently, inexorably, towards the forbidden south wing. Clutching a small, flickering candle, Elara moved like a wraith through the dark, silent corridors. The melody grew stronger, guiding her. She found the main entrance to the south wing firmly locked. But further down a narrow, unused passage, she discovered a small service door, usually concealed behind a heavy tapestry, slightly ajar. Dust motes danced in her candle's faint glow, stirring like restless spirits. She hesitated, her breath catching in her throat, a battle raging between obedience and an overwhelming, illicit curiosity. The temptation to uncover the keep's secrets was too potent. With a nervous resolve, she pushed the door open, the creak echoing loudly in the oppressive silence, and stepped across the threshold. The air within the south wing was thick with the scent of dust and forgotten things, heavy and cold despite the season. Elara moved cautiously, her candle beam cutting through the gloom. She found herself in a large sitting room, its furnishings draped in white dust sheets, giving the room the appearance of sleeping giants. But not everything was covered. Half-packed boxes stood open, revealing yellowed silks and lace. A half-finished embroidery piece lay abandoned on a small table, its needle still threaded. A discarded novel, its pages dog-eared, rested on an armchair. This was not a general storage room. It was a woman's room, a life abruptly interrupted, frozen in time, and it was certainly not Alaric's. A profound melancholy settled over Elara as she imagined the woman who had once inhabited this space. Her gaze fell upon a small, intricately carved wooden box on a bedside table, half hidden beneath a faded shawl. It was dark, polished mahogany, inlaid with mother-of-pearl, depicting delicate ivy vines. Her heart leaped. This was it, the source of the melody. With trembling fingers, Elara lifted the lid. A soft, clear tune filled the silent room, a melody of such ethereal beauty and profound sadness that it brought tears to her eyes. It was the haunting tune from her dreams, now real, tangible. This was Charlotte Blackwood's music box, she knew with a certainty that chilled her to the bone. A tangible connection to the past, a spectral echo of the woman whose portrait had so captivated Alaric, a woman whose name was now irrevocably intertwined with Blackwood Keep's deepest tragedies. A week later, still reeling from her discovery, Elara found solace in the magnificent Blackwood Library. Its 2-story height, lined with shelves reaching to the ceiling, accessible by rolling ladders, felt like a sanctuary. The scent of old paper and leather was a comfort. One afternoon, as she ascended a ladder to retrieve a volume of botanical illustrations, she saw him. Alaric was seated in a leather chair by the roaring fire, so absorbed in his reading that he did not immediately notice her entrance. His severe features were softened by the flickering firelight, his posture relaxed, a stark contrast to his usual rigid formality. For an instant, she glimpsed the man he might have been, unburdened. He looked up, surprise flickering across his face before the familiar mask descended. "Forgive me," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I did not hear you enter." "No, I should apologize for disturbing you," Elara replied, a faint blush rising to her cheeks, backing towards the door. "I'll return later. Please, stay." The words seemed to surprise Alaric as much as they did her. He gestured to the shelves. "The library is yours to use as you wish. I was just leaving." He began to rise, but Elara found herself speaking without planning to. "What are you reading?" Alaric hesitated, then held up the volume. A collection of poetry by John Keats. An indulgence, he admitted, something almost like embarrassment crossing his features. "Beauty is truth, truth beauty." Elara quoted softly, recognizing the poet. Alaric's eyes widened slightly. "You know Keats?" "My father's library was well stocked, if not as impressive as this one," she replied. "And I've always found solace in poetry." A moment of genuine connection passed between them, brief but undeniable, a fragile bridge built on shared appreciation. Then Alaric cleared his throat, rising from his chair. "I shall leave you to your reading," Alaric said, his tone reverting to its customary formality. As he passed her, he paused. "Elara," he said, her name still sounding unfamiliar on his lips. "Blackwood Keep is your home now. You need not hide away in your chambers. The house and grounds are yours to explore." His mouth tightened slightly. "Except for the south wing," she finished for him, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," he nodded, studying her face as if searching for something. Whatever it was, he seemed not to find it, for he merely inclined his head in a formal bow before leaving her alone among the books. Elara moved to the chair he had vacated, still warm from his presence. On the small table beside it lay not only the Keats volume but a leather-bound journal, its pages filled with what appeared to be estate accounts. Beside it was a list of tenant names, with notes about repairs needed to their cottages and improvements to their farming equipment. Elara picked up the leather-bound journal, her fingers tracing the neat, precise handwriting. It was not a personal diary, but a meticulous record of the estate's finances, land allocations, and, most surprisingly, detailed notes on the welfare of his tenants. She read entries about reduced rents during a poor harvest, funds allocated for a new well in the village, and plans for improved drainage in the lower fields. Society's rumors painted Duke Alaric as a cold, heartless man, secluded and indifferent. Yet these pages revealed a diligent, responsible landlord, one who took his duties seriously and cared for those under his protection. It was a small revelation, but one that added significant complexity to the portrait she was beginning to form of her mysterious husband, chipping away at the fearsome facade. That night, sleep eluded Elara once more. She lay in the massive four-poster bed, staring at the velvet canopy above, her mind a whirlwind of new discoveries. The haunting melody of the music box, the faint echo of Charlotte Blackwood's presence, now intertwined with the unexpected glimpses of Alaric's hidden sensitivity and his quiet, responsible stewardship of the estate. He was not the monster society portrayed, nor was he merely the stern, distant figure she had married. There were layers to Alaric Radcliffe, depths of character she was only just beginning to fathom. What other secrets lurked in the shadows of Blackwood Keep? And what more lay beneath the carefully guarded facade of the man who, when faced with her fear, had offered not domination, but choice? Her sapphire ring, cool against her finger, felt less like a chain and more like a key to a profound, unsettling mystery. Weeks stretched into a measured, quiet rhythm. Elara settled further into the vastness of Blackwood Keep, establishing a routine that was a careful dance around Alaric's own. He remained an absent husband, preoccupied with estate business that frequently took him from dawn until dusk. Their meals together continued to be formal and polite, marked by superficial exchanges about the weather or household affairs, never straying into personal territory. True to his word, Alaric made no advances, maintaining an emotional distance that, while frustrating, also afforded Elara a strange sense of security. He treated her with unfailing respect, ensuring her material comfort, yet the emotional chasm between them remained as wide and silent as the Blackwood moors. Elara tried, in her subtle way, to learn more from the keep's inhabitants. The staff performed their duties with exceptional efficiency, moving through the vast house like well-oiled machinery, yet they maintained a weary distance from their new mistress. Their faces were carefully neutral, their replies polite but evasive when Elara ventured any questions about the Duke or the estate's history. Mrs. Malara Winters occasionally unbent enough to offer glimpses into the meticulous workings of the household, but she remained steadfastly loyal to Alaric, a silent sentinel guarding his past. She revealed nothing of substance about him, her impassive voice a barrier Elara could not breach, leaving the new Duchess to wonder at the depths of loyalty and silence that permeated Blackwood Keep. One evening, as Bethany arranged Elara's copper-colored hair, Elara found herself mentioning the south wing. "I heard a most curious melody from that wing the other night," she said, her voice light, testing the waters. "A haunting tune, like from a music box." Bethany's hands stilled in Elara's tresses, a visible flicker of pain and sadness, crossing her usually placid features, quickly masked. Her eyes, briefly clouded with a distant memory, met Elara's in the mirror. "The south wing holds many old sorrows, Your Grace," Bethany said, her voice strained, softer than usual. "Some ghosts are best left undisturbed." Her hands trembled slightly as she resumed her work, a silent warning that spoke volumes, hinting at a personal connection to the keep's sorrowful past that Elara could not yet fathom. During an afternoon's solitary exploration, Elara ventured into the north wing, a section of the house she had yet to fully discover. In a rarely used drawing room behind heavy velvet draperies that had clearly not been drawn in years, she found it, a family grouping, half hidden, gathering dust. The canvas, though faded, immediately captured her attention. A younger Alaric, perhaps 16 or 17, stood beside a seated couple, his resemblance to the stern-faced Duke she knew clearly marking him as their son. But it was the fourth figure in the painting that caused Elara's breath to catch. A young boy of about 10, with the same raven hair as Alaric, but softer features, his smile carefree in a way she had never witnessed on her husband's face. A brother, she realized, a wave of surprise washing over her. Alaric had a brother. That would be Master Frederick, the young master. The voice startled Elara. She whirled around to find Simmons, the elderly butler, standing in the doorway, his expression unusually grave. "I didn't know Alaric had a brother," she said, turning back to study the painting, a knot forming in her stomach. Simmons hesitated before answering, his gaze lingering on the boy in the portrait. "Had, Your Grace. Master Frederick passed many years ago." "How?" The question escaped before Elara could consider its propriety. The butler's face closed, like a book snapping shut, his lips tightening into a thin line. "It is not my place to speak of such matters, Your Grace. If you'll excuse me, I have duties to attend to." He was gone before she could press further, leaving Elara with more questions than answers, the carefree smile of Master Frederick now a poignant mystery. That evening at dinner, Elara gathered her courage. "I found a portrait today," she began carefully, watching Alaric's expression as he reached for his wineglass, "in the north drawing room." Alaric's hand stilled momentarily, the silver goblet halfway to his lips. "Did you?" he replied, his voice flat. "You had a brother." The temperature in the grand dining room seemed to drop several degrees. Alaric's face hardened into the impenetrable mask she had come to know well. "Frederick died 20 years ago," he said flatly, his eyes like chips of blue ice. "The portrait should have been removed with the others." "Others?" Elara couldn't help asking. "I prefer not to be reminded of what cannot be changed." His tone brooked no further discussion. "If you'll excuse me, I have correspondence requiring my attention." He left his meal half-finished, striding from the room with a tension evident in every rigid line of his powerful body. leaving Elara chilled and profoundly unsettled. Unable to sleep that night, Elara paced her chambers, the sapphire ring a cold weight on her finger. Alaric's abrupt withdrawal, his refusal to speak of his brother, only deepened her frustration. How could she ever hope to bridge the gulf between them if he clung so fiercely to his secrets? Yet, beneath the frustration, a powerful desire to understand him, to reach the man hidden beneath the formidable armor, began to solidify. The music box in the south wing, the glimpses of a sensitive soul in the library, the diligent landlord, and now the ghost of a lost brother. These fragments, she realized, were pieces of a puzzle she was compelled to solve. If Alaric would not willingly share his past, she would uncover it herself. A decisive choice, born of burgeoning empathy and relentless curiosity, took root in her heart. The following morning, Elara had spread several old estate maps across a table in her sitting room, poring over the faded lines and forgotten names, searching for clues. Bethany entered with her morning tea, her eyes immediately falling upon the maps. A subtle gasp escaped her lips. "Your Grace," she began, her voice strained. "I must advise caution. Some places, some memories, are best left undisturbed." Elara looked up, noting the worry etched around Bethany's eyes, the slight tremble in her hands as she set down the tray. "I'm trying to understand, Bethany. The Duke's past." "Frederick." Bethany wrung her hands. "My lady, my own father. He worked in the mines. He was there that day. Please, don't stir up old ghosts. It brings nothing but pain." Her partial confession hung in the air, a plea heavy with unspoken grief and conflicted loyalty. The following morning dawned with a deceptive calm, a pale sun attempting to pierce the lingering mists over Blackwood Keep. In the grand dining room, the silence was broken only by the clink of silverware and the rustle of Alaric's morning papers. He sat at the head of the table, as always, a formidable figure even in the domestic setting. Elara, across from him, felt a tremor of anticipation she tried to conceal behind a mask of polite composure. This was her chance. "I shall be traveling to London today," Alaric stated, his voice even, devoid of inflection. "Estate matters require my personal attention for several days." He looked at her, his piercing blue eyes holding hers for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in their depths. "Is there anything you require from town, Elara?" Elara's heart quickened. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for. "No, Your Grace," she replied, her voice steady. "I believe I have everything I need here at Blackwood." A brief, almost imperceptible shadow of disappointment crossed Alaric's features, quickly masked. He merely nodded, a curt dismissal of the topic, and returned his gaze to his correspondence. He was unaware of the quiet resolve that burned beneath Elara's polite exterior, or the ambitious plans she now nurtured. As soon as Alaric's carriage rumbled down the long drive, leaving Blackwood Keep shrouded in a new kind of silence, Elara made her way to the library. The vast room, usually a source of comfort, now felt like a vault guarding ancient secrets. She moved with a purpose, her steps echoing faintly on the polished floorboards, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. Her eyes scanned the towering shelves, the intricate globes, the heavy, imposing desk where Alaric often sat. This was where the answers lay. She was certain. Her gaze fell upon a particular drawer in the desk, set slightly apart from the others, its polished surface worn smooth in places by countless touches. It was locked. A simple, old-fashioned lock, but a lock nonetheless, signifying something meant to be kept hidden. Elara's breath hitched. To open it would be an unforgivable breach of trust, an invasion of her husband's most private sanctuary. Yet, how else could she ever truly understand the man she had married? The man whose shadows both terrified and fascinated her. Her fingers trembled as she picked up a silver letter opener from the desk, its cool weight, a stark contrast to the heat of her internal conflict. Betrayal or understanding? The choice felt monumental, but curiosity, a relentless, compelling force, had already won. With a deep, shaky breath, Elara inserted the tip of the letter opener into the lock. It was a crude instrument for such a delicate task, but after several fumbling attempts, There was a faint click. The lock yielded. A wave of triumph, quickly followed by a profound sense of trepidation, washed over her. She pulled the drawer open slowly, the heavy wood groaning in protest. Inside, nestled amongst neatly tied bundles of old letters and a small, tarnished silver locket, lay a small leather journal. Its pages were yellowed with age, its cover worn, and as Elara's trembling fingers carefully opened it, she recognized the handwriting. It was unmistakably Alaric's, though younger, less controlled, less severe than the bold, angular script she knew from his recent note. This was the journal of a boy, becoming a man, a raw, unfiltered glimpse into the heart of her mysterious husband. Holding it, she felt the weight of his private thoughts, a profound discovery that promised to unravel the enigma of Blackwood Keep. Elara found a quiet corner in the vast library, sinking into a leather armchair by the unlit hearth. The journal felt heavy in her hands. A Pandora's box she was both desperate and fearful to open. She turned the fragile pages, her eyes scanning the early entries. They spoke of the ordinary concerns of a young aristocrat: studies, writing, the occasional social engagement. Frederick, his younger brother, appeared frequently in the narrative, clearly adored by Alaric, despite the typical tensions that sometimes arose between siblings. Their parents, Lord and Lady Radcliffe, emerged as distant, demanding figures, particularly their father, the previous Duke, whose approval seemed an elusive prize. Then, her gaze snagged on an entry, dated April 15, 1827. Her blood ran cold. April 15, 1827. Father insists I accompany him to survey the new section of the mine. Frederick begged to come along. He has been fascinated by the operation since Father first showed us the plans. Mother intervened on his behalf, despite Father's initial refusals. Sometimes I believe Frederick could charm the very birds from the trees. We leave at first light tomorrow. Elara's heart pounded. A chilling premonition of tragedy, written in the innocent hand of a boy who could not know the fate that awaited them. The next entry was dated nearly a week later, April 21, 1827. The change in handwriting was stark, erratic, jagged, blotched in places as if tears had fallen on the page and smeared the ink. The words themselves were a raw, agonizing cry of a brother's grief. April 21, 1827. They are saying I could not have saved him, that no one could have reached him in time. The physician claims I would have perished as well had I managed to go back into the collapsed tunnel. Cold comfort, as I hear mothers weeping through the walls. Father speaks to no one, locks himself in his study with brandy as his only companion. Frederick is gone. My brother is gone. And with him, any light that existed in this cursed house. Elara felt her own throat tighten, tears springing to her eyes, tracing paths down her cheeks as she read the heartbreaking words. The depth of the boy Alaric's pain, his crushing guilt, leapt from the page and gripped her own heart. The horrifying truth of the mine collapse, the indelible mark it had left on a young soul, was etched in ink and sorrow. Several pages had been violently torn out after that devastating entry, as if the pain they contained was too great to be preserved, too unbearable even to recall. When the journal resumed, months had passed, and the voice had changed irrevocably. The boy's innocent wonder had been replaced by a hardened, controlled tone, chillingly reminiscent of the man she knew as the Duke. November 3, 1827. Father's drinking worsens. The mine remains closed after the accident, though the workers suffer for lack of income. When I suggested reopening with improved safety measures, he flew into a rage unlike anything I have witnessed. "That cursed place has taken enough from this family," he shouted. Perhaps he is right, yet I cannot help but think Frederick would want us to make something good come from his loss. Mother barely leaves her rooms now. The physician provides laudanum to help her sleep, but I fear she takes too much. She looks through me when we speak, as if hoping to see Frederick instead. Subsequent entries chronicled the agonizing disintegration of the Radcliffe family. Alaric's father, the previous Duke, retreated further into a bitter abyss of alcoholism. His mother faded into a laudanum-induced oblivion, her mind lost to grief and despair. And Alaric himself, barely more than a boy, was forced to shoulder responsibilities far beyond his years as the once thriving estate began to falter, neglected by its broken master. One tragedy had indeed led to another, leaving a young man isolated, burdened, and utterly alone. The final entry in the journal came after a long, silent gap, a testament to the years Alaric had spent enduring, not recording. It was stark, bleak, and chillingly prophetic of the man he would become. June 17th, 1830. Father is dead, found in his study this morning, the empty decanter beside him. The physician claims his heart simply gave out, but I know better. He died of grief and guilt long ago. His body has merely caught up at last. Mother shows no reaction to the news. I doubt she fully comprehends it. At 19, I am now the Duke of Blackwood, master of an estate in decline and a family in ruins. I made a vow at Frederick's graveside that I would restore what was lost, that his death would not be meaningless. Now the burden falls entirely to me. I will not fail him again. This shall be my last entry in this journal. Sentiment and self-pity are luxuries I can no longer afford. From this day forward I must be the Duke in all things. Elara closed the journal, her hands trembling. This was it. The moment the boy Alaric had died, and the fearsome Duke had been born. A chilling vow, made in the crucible of unimaginable grief, to never fail again, at the cost of his own heart, his own humanity. The starkness of his resolve, the complete abandonment of sentiment, painted a vivid, tragic portrait of the man who had become her husband. Elara sat for a long time, the closed journal resting in her lap. Its weight, a physical manifestation of Alaric's burden. Her heart ached for the boy who had lost so much, for the man who had locked his grief away so completely that it had calcified into the hard, impenetrable shell he now presented to the world. His past, once a terrifying enigma, was now a profound sorrow. She carefully returned the journal to its drawer, unable to bring herself to read any more of his private pain. As she rose from the desk, her gaze fell upon a small painting, half hidden on a high shelf, tucked behind a heavier volume of archaic legal texts. It was a watercolor, delicate and muted, depicting a young woman with a gentle smile and eyes that held a familiar kindness. What truly caught Elara's breath, however, was the cascade of copper hair, a shade remarkably similar to her own. A new mystery, a new face of grief, now emerged from the shadows of Blackwood Keep. Her name was Charlotte Blackwood. The voice, calm and measured, startled Elara so profoundly that she gasped, whirling around. Mrs. Elara Winters stood in the library doorway, her expression as unreadable as ever, her dark eyes moving from Elara to the painting, and back again. Elara felt a flush of guilt creep up her neck. I wasn't. I was just," Elara stammered, unable to form a coherent excuse. Mrs. Elara stepped into the room, her gaze still fixed on Elara. "You resemble her somewhat. I suspected that might be why the Duke chose you when I first saw your portrait." Elara felt dizzy, the words barely registering. "My portrait? What portrait?" "The one he commissioned from the artist who sketched you at Lady Harrington's ball 2 seasons ago," Mrs. Elara replied, as if this were common knowledge, her voice impassive. "The Duke saw you there and was affected by the resemblance." The revelation hit Elara like a physical blow. Alaric had seen her, had chosen her, not for herself alone, but because she reminded him of another. The horror of being a mere replacement, a ghost made flesh, began to settle in her heart. Elara stared at Mrs. Elara, her mind reeling with this new, terrible understanding. "Who was she to him?" she whispered, the words barely audible. Mrs. Elara hesitated, a shadow crossing her usually stern countenance. "They were to be married, Your Grace, before the accident that took Master Frederick. She was visiting Blackwood Keep that day, waiting for them to return from the mine." The housekeeper's voice grew softer, laced with a rare, profound sadness. When word came of the collapse, she insisted on going to the site. Her horse was spooked by the commotion. She was thrown and broke her neck instantly. Horror washed over Elara, cold and complete, So Alaric had lost both his beloved younger brother and his fiancée on the same devastating day. And effectively, his parents soon after lost to grief and addiction. A double tragedy, so immense it was almost unfathomable. "That's why he never married," Elara whispered, the realization a painful knot in her chest. "Until now, until me." The terrible thought solidified, sharp and agonizing. Am I merely a replacement, a ghost made flesh? A flicker of something softened in Mrs. Melara's usually severe countenance, a rare breach of her impassive facade. "I have served Blackwood Keep for 40 years, Your Grace. I watched the Duke grow from a carefree boy to a burdened young man, to the master he is today. I have never seen him look at anyone the way he sometimes looks at you, when he believes himself unobserved." Elara's heart quickened, a fragile spark of hope igniting amidst the ashes of her fears. "What do you mean?" The housekeeper straightened, her professional demeanor returning. "The Duke chose you because you reminded him of someone he once loved, yes, but in these weeks I believe he has begun to see you for yourself." Mrs. Melara's gaze was steady, unwavering. "It is not my place to say more. I simply thought you should understand something of the man you have married." And with that, she turned and left, leaving Elara alone with a storm of new emotions. The crushing weight of Alaric's past, the unsettling truth of her resemblance to Charlotte, and the faint, bewildering hope that perhaps, just perhaps, Alaric was beginning to see her. Alaric returned from London 3 days later, his carriage rolling down the long gravel drive just as dusk began to bleed across the sky. Elara watched him from an upper window, not with the dread of a fearful bride, but with a newfound empathy that shifted her entire perception. She saw the weariness etched around his piercing blue eyes, the subtle slump of his broad shoulders that hinted at the immense weight of responsibilities he carried alone. He moved with his usual austere grace, but today, Elara noticed the almost imperceptible moments when he seemed lost in thought, his gaze distant, perhaps in memories of a past he could not change, a past she now understood with heartbreaking clarity. He was not a monster, she realized, but a man burdened by an unimaginable past. Everything had changed. That evening at dinner, the usual stifling silence hung heavy in the grand dining room. Alaric, though outwardly composed, seemed more withdrawn than usual, his attention divided between his meal and the correspondence laid beside his plate. Elara, however, found a new courage stirring within her. She had come too far, learned too much, to retreat into the polite distance of their early marriage. This was her chance to bridge the chasm. "How was your journey to London, Your Grace?" she asked, her voice soft but sincere. It was not a question born of duty, but of genuine interest, a desire to truly connect. Alaric looked up, surprise evident in his eyes. Whether at the question itself or at her sincere tone, Elara couldn't tell. He paused, a fork midway to his plate. "Productive, if somewhat tedious," he replied, his voice deep. "The solicitors required signatures on several documents regarding the eastern properties." Elara's heart pounded, but she held his gaze, pushing past the initial superficial reply. "The mining properties?" she ventured carefully, watching his expression intently. Alaric's hand stilled completely, the fork clattering softly onto his plate, his eyes, already piercing, sharpened, narrowing slightly as he regarded her. The surprise was gone, replaced by a keen, almost suspicious assessment. "You've been making inquiries during my absence," he stated, not as a question, but a quiet accusation. The temperature in the dining room seemed to drop several degrees, and the air crackled with unspoken tension. Elara knew she had crossed a line, but there was no turning back now. This was the moment of truth. Elara took a deep breath, refusing to falter. "I've been trying to understand Blackwood Keep," she replied, holding his gaze. "And its master." A long, taut silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the distant tick of a grandfather clock in the hall. Finally, Alaric set down his fork with deliberate care, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the table. His face drained of color, and for a terrifying moment, Elara feared she had pushed him too far, broken something irreparable. "What exactly have you discovered, Elara?" His voice was dangerously quiet, a low rumble that vibrated with suppressed emotion. "I know about Frederick," she confessed softly, "and about Charlotte Blackwood." Alaric's eyes closed briefly, a shudder passing through his rigid frame. When he opened them again, the raw, unmasked pain visible there made Elara's heart constrict. All the carefully constructed walls had crumbled, revealing the profound wounds beneath. "So now you know why the Duke of Blackwood is feared and avoided," he said, his voice laced with a bitter self-loathing. "The cursed lord whose family and fiancée perished under mysterious circumstances, the man who emerged from tragedy cold and heartless." "That's not what I see," Elara said softly, her voice filled with a compassion that seemed to surprise Alaric. His expression turned skeptical, a flash of the guarded Duke returning. "No," he challenged, his tone laced with weary resignation. "What do you see, then?" Elara leaned forward, her emerald eyes unwavering. "I see a man who lost everything he loved when he was scarcely more than a boy, who shouldered responsibilities that would have crushed most men, who survived." "Surviving is not living," he replied so quietly. She almost didn't hear him, his gaze fixed on some unseen point beyond her. His words were a testament to 2 decades of silent suffering, a life lived in the shadow of insurmountable grief. But Elara refused to let him retreat. She had seen beyond the mask, glimpsed the broken boy beneath, and now she would offer him more than pity. She would offer him hope. Elara gathered her courage, her voice firm yet gentle. "Then perhaps it's time to start living again." Their eyes met across the table, and in that moment something shifted. A genuine connection, perhaps for the first time since their marriage, formed between them. The rigid lines of Alaric's face softened almost imperceptibly, making him appear younger, more vulnerable, as if a great weight had been momentarily lifted. He studied her face, searching perhaps for judgment, but finding only understanding. The moment, fragile and profound, was broken by the arrival of a footman, bearing the next course. Alaric withdrew behind his usual mask of formality, but not completely. Throughout the remainder of dinner, the conversation remained formal, but Elara caught Alaric watching her with an expression that mingled curiosity with something warmer, a nascent interest that surprised her. As they prepared to part for the evening, Alaric hesitated, his hand resting on the back of his chair. It was a small gesture, but to Elara it spoke volumes. Would you care to join me in the library tomorrow?" he asked, his voice tentative, almost uncertain. "There is a collection of first editions I think might interest you." The invitation, though hesitantly offered, represented the first voluntary extension of companionship from her husband, a fragile olive branch across the chasm of their past. Elara smiled, her heart lifting with a lightness she hadn't felt in weeks. "I would like that very much, Alaric." He nodded, a flicker of something like satisfaction crossing his features. "Good night, Elara." "Good night, Alaric," she replied, savoring the sound of his given name on her tongue. It felt like a small victory, a promise of a future they might yet build together. They turned to leave the dining room, a fragile sense of understanding blossoming between them, when a sharp, insistent knock echoed through the grand entrance hall, followed quickly by the sound of the massive oak doors being opened. Simmons, the elderly butler, appeared, his face a carefully composed mask of polite surprise. "Your Grace," he announced, his voice carrying an unusual edge of apprehension, "we have an unexpected caller, Mrs. Letitia Vance." Before Alaric or Elara could respond, a woman swept past Simmons, her silks rustling like dry leaves. She was tall, elegantly dressed, with sharp features and an expression of cold calculation that seemed to chill the very air. Her eyes, a piercing shade of gray, fixed first on Alaric, then on Elara, lingering with an unnerving scrutiny. "Duke Alaric," she purred, her voice a silken blade. "And so, this is your new Duchess. How unexpected." A new threat had arrived at Blackwood Keep, threatening to shatter the nascent connection between husband and wife. Moments later they were in the drawing room, the tension palpable enough to cut with a knife. Letitia Vance, Charlotte Blackwood's distant cousin, settled onto a velvet settee, a predatory gleam in her sharp eyes. She wasted no time on pleasantries, her false civility barely concealing her true intentions. "Such a sudden marriage, Your Grace," Letitia began, her gaze flicking between Alaric's rigid posture and Elara's sapphire ring. "After all these years of solitude, one might almost wonder at the haste. And to such a young, vivacious lady, so much life, so much resemblance." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, though it was loud enough for everyone to hear. Of course, given the rather unstable nature of the Blackwood line, and Charlotte's own untimely end, one does worry about the Duke's judgment. A man so prone to accidents on his estate. Alaric stood like a statue, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a controlled fury. Elara felt a wave of indignation rise within her. Letitia was not merely gossiping. She was laying the groundwork for something far more sinister, hinting at a darker agenda that threatened to unravel all the fragile progress Elara and Alaric had made. Her sharp, assessing gaze seemed to strip away Elara's composure, and for the first time, Elara felt not just fear for Alaric, but a fierce, protective defiance for their burgeoning connection. The morning after Letitia Vance's unsettling arrival, Blackwood Keep's grand drawing room, usually a bastion of quiet dignity, thrummed with a brittle, unwelcome tension. Letitia, sharp-featured and draped in an expensive, unforgiving black gown, sat opposite Alaric and Elara, a thin-lipped solicitor named Mr. Finch by her side. A smug, proprietary air clung to her like a scent. "Your Grace," Letitia began, her voice dripping with false civility, "while I mourn my dear cousin Charlotte's untimely end, it is clear that the tragedy, and indeed the unstable conditions of the mines, rendered this estate, and its master, unfit for proper management. As Charlotte's closest living relative, it is my unfortunate duty to seek reparations, a portion of Blackwood, to ensure such recklessness does not befall another innocent soul, and to secure my family's rightful claim." Her eyes flicked to Elara, a sneer barely veiled. Especially now, with such a precipitous marriage. Alaric's jaw was clenched, his knuckles white as he gripped the armrest of his chair. His gaze, usually impenetrable, burned with a controlled fury Elara had rarely witnessed. He said nothing, allowing the venom to hang in the air, a testament to his ingrained stoicism, but Elara felt the vibrations of his suppressed rage. The solicitor, Mr. Finch, merely adjusted his spectacles, his expression as neutral as the gray morning sky. Letitia's words were a calculated assault, striking not just at Alaric's wealth, but at his very sanity and the painful wounds of his past. The silence that followed Letitia's brazen claim was suffocating, thick with her unspoken accusation and Alaric's simmering anger. But Elara, usually reserved in such company, felt a sudden, fierce protectiveness rise within her. This woman spoke of Alaric as if he were a madman, dismissing his grief and responsibility with callous disregard. Elara straightened in her seat, her emerald eyes meeting Letitia's with an unexpected fire. "Mrs. Vance," she began, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the tension. "While I understand your concern for your late cousin, I must respectfully disagree with your assessment of the Duke's fitness. Since my arrival, I have witnessed firsthand His Grace's diligent management of Blackwood Keep. His tenants speak of a fair landlord, one who has not only maintained, but actively sought to improve their living conditions and support their livelihoods, even through difficult times. Such actions hardly speak of recklessness, but of profound responsibility." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "And as for this precipitous marriage, it is one founded on mutual respect and understanding, and it is entirely valid in the eyes of God and law. Your insinuations are unfounded, and frankly, beneath the dignity of this house." Letitia's smug expression faltered, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing her face. For a moment, she was silenced, her carefully constructed attack momentarily derailed. Alaric, who had been watching Elara with an intensity that held both shock and a dawning gratitude, felt a tremor of pride. His duchess, no shrinking violet, had stepped forward to defend him. Later that day, the heavy oak door of Alaric's study closed with a soft thud, sealing them within its masculine confines. Alaric moved to his desk, but instead of immediately immersing himself in papers, he turned to Elara, his formidable facade momentarily eased. "Elara," he said, his voice a low rumble, I thank you. Your defense this morning was both unexpected and deeply appreciated." Few would dare to challenge Letitia Vance with such conviction. Elara met his gaze, a faint blush warming her cheeks. She was unfair, Alaric. To speak of you and Blackwood with such malice, when she knows nothing of the truth. He gave a curt nod, then gestured to the maps and ledgers spread across his large desk. Her claim, while baseless, is not entirely without legal nuisance. She seeks to exploit old wounds, to paint me as negligent. We must prepare. My solicitor, Mr. Davies, is already compiling a response, but your testimony, your presence, changes matters significantly. He leaned over the desk, indicating a faded parchment. We must show a united front, demonstrate that Blackwood is not adrift, that it is led by a capable duke and a duchess who understands its worth. As Elara leaned beside him, their shoulders brushing, a sense of shared purpose settled between them. It was a novel sensation, this alliance forged in adversity, a quiet strength growing from their common enemy. For the first time, Elara felt not just his wife, but his partner. Weeks unfolded into a steady rhythm of legal battles and quiet moments. Mr. Davies, Alaric's solicitor, frequently visited, his presence a constant reminder of Letitia Vance's persistent claims. Legal correspondence piled high, and strategy meetings became a regular fixture in Alaric's study. Yet amidst the tension of this external threat, something profound was blossoming between Elara and Alaric. Their daily library sessions, once tentative, had become a cherished ritual. They would often sit in companionable silence, Alaric absorbed in his estate journals, Elara lost in a volume of poetry or history. But increasingly, the silence would break, giving way to conversations that stretched beyond books and estate matters, delving into shared interests, observations, and even past experiences. Elara learned of his passion for ancient history, his meticulous care for the Blackwood archives. He, in turn, discovered her keen interest in botany and her surprisingly sharp observations of human nature. Their smiles, once rare and cautious, now found each other with natural ease. There was an intellectual intimacy growing between them, a comfort in mutual understanding that transcended the formal boundaries of their marriage. The legal skirmishes with Letitia, rather than driving them apart, seemed to press them closer, forging an unforeseen alliance born of shared purpose and a dawning, undeniable affection. It was a love story quietly unfolding amidst the chaos, hidden from the prying eyes of society and the calculated malice of a rival. One blustery afternoon, as rain lashed against the windows, Elara wandered into the music room, a space she had rarely entered. To her surprise, the grand pianoforte stood open, its keys gleaming invitingly. She sat, her fingers hesitantly finding a familiar melody. Alaric, drawn by the unexpected music, appeared in the doorway. "You play," he stated, a rare note of surprise in his voice. Elara nodded. "A little. My mother insisted on lessons." "It has been many years since music filled these halls," he said, stepping further into the room. His gaze fell upon a stack of yellowed sheet music tucked into a cabinet. Charlotte played. His voice was soft, devoid of its usual sharpness, tinged with a delicate sadness. "I had the instrument tuned after I discovered your talent. Perhaps it is time these pieces were heard again, if you would not mind." Elara's heart ached with understanding. She picked up the old sheet music, recognizing the haunting melody she had heard from the music box in the south wing. As her fingers danced over the keys, playing Charlotte's music, Alaric closed his eyes, his face a complex mixture of pain and a fragile peace. The notes filled the room, weaving a tapestry of forgotten joy and lingering sorrow. When the final chord faded, a sacred silence settled. "Thank you," Alaric murmured, his voice rough with emotion, his eyes still closed. "She would have liked you, I think." The words were both a poignant acknowledgment of the past and a precious validation for Elara, a sign that he saw her as herself, not merely a shadow. As the calendar pages turned and early April approached, a subtle, almost imperceptible shift began in Alaric. The newfound lightness in his demeanor slowly receded, replaced by a familiar gravity. He spent longer hours closeted in his study, the faint glow of his lamp visible deep into the night. His structured routine, which had begun to include shared evenings with Elara, frayed at the edges. Elara noticed the shadows deepening beneath his piercing blue eyes, the rigid set of his shoulders returning. Twice she heard him cry out in the night, a stifled sound of anguish emanating from his separate bedchamber. When she rushed to his door, concern lacing her voice, he would always be closed off, insisting it was merely a bad dream, his face a mask of polite but distant dismissal. The anniversary of the tragedy, she realized with a growing sense of foreboding, cast a long and heavy shadow over Blackwood Keep, threatening to pull Alaric back into the darkness from which she had just begun to draw him. The emotional distance, once a chasm, was slowly, painfully, reopening between them. The eve of the anniversary was ushered in by a sky heavy with bruised purple clouds, promising a storm. Alaric did not appear for dinner. Elara, her stomach clenching with apprehension, inquired of Mrs. Elara Winters, whose composed exterior, for once, seemed to crack with a fine line of worry. "His Grace went riding, your Grace," Mrs. Elara informed her, her gaze fixed on the darkening windows where the first drops of rain began to patter. "He has not yet returned, despite the gathering storm." "Riding?" Elara repeated, a cold dread seeping into her bones. "But where?" Mrs. Elara hesitated, her lips pressed into a thin line. "He always rides on this day, your Grace, to the old mine site, on the southeastern edge of the estate. Usually he returns before nightfall." Her voice dropped to a near whisper, laden with years of unspoken fear. "It is his ritual." The revelation sent a shiver down Elara's spine. Alaric, lost in his grief, riding towards the very place that had shattered his life as a tempest brewed. The rain began to lash against the windows, mirroring the storm of fear gathering in Elara's heart. Midnight passed, and still there was no sign of Alaric. The storm had intensified, a furious tempest of wind and rain that rattled the ancient windows of Blackwood Keep. Elara could wait no longer. Her fear for Alaric had transmuted into a fierce resolve. She strode into the entrance hall, where Simmons, the butler, and Mrs. Elara Winters stood, their faces etched with worry. Bethany, her lady's maid, hovered nearby, her own face pale. "Lanterns," Elara commanded, her voice ringing with an authority she hadn't known she possessed. "And horses. We will organize a search party." "Your Grace, I must advise against you joining the search," Simmons protested, stepping forward. "The weather is treacherous, and the paths near the old mine shaft are unstable even in daylight." "Then that is where I shall look first," Elara declared, pulling on a heavy riding cloak and gloves that Bethany had silently offered. "You may accompany me or not, as you choose, but I will not sit idle while my husband is missing." Her conviction was unwavering. Simmons, seeing the resolute set of her chin, merely inclined his head. Bethany, without a word, stepped forward, pulling on her own cloak. Her loyalty, though often quiet, was absolute. "I will come with you, my lady." The journey to the old mine shaft was harrowing. Rain pelted them mercilessly, turning the familiar paths into treacherous rivers of mud that threatened to unseat them with every skittish step their horses took. The wind howled like a banshee through the skeletal trees, tearing at their cloaks and chilling them to the bone. Lightning illuminated the wild, wind-swept moors in brief, terrifying flashes, revealing the desolate landscape as a series of distorted, monstrous shapes. The accompanying thunder, deep and resonant, made the horses rear and shy, their eyes rolling with fear. Elara gripped the reins, her teeth gritted against the cold and the fear gnawing at her. Bethany, riding beside her, offered quiet words of direction, her knowledge of the estate's hidden paths proving invaluable. The two grooms who accompanied them rode in grim silence, their expressions suggesting they would rather face any punishment the Duke might mete out than venture near the abandoned mine on this, of all nights. Every step was a battle against the elements, a desperate race against time, and the encroaching darkness of Alaric's despair. They found Alaric's horse first, huddled miserably beneath an outcropping of jagged rock, its reins loosely secured to a stunted, wind-swept tree. The animal was shivering, its coat plastered with rain but otherwise unharmed. Alaric, however, was nowhere in sight. "His Grace's horse!" one of the grooms shouted over the roar of the storm, pointing a gloved hand towards a dark, gaping maw on the hillside ahead. "The entrance is just ahead, Your Grace. But no one has been inside for years. It's not safe." Elara's heart hammered against her ribs. Footprints, undeniably Alaric's, were clearly visible in the churned mud, leading directly to the ominous opening. He was inside. The knowledge brought a fresh wave of dread, but also a surge of desperate determination. "Wait here with the horses," Elara commanded, her voice firm despite the tremor in her hands as she dismounted. "If we have not returned in half an hour, ride back for help." Lantern held high, its feeble light battling the oppressive darkness, Elara approached the mine entrance. It was a dark, brooding cavern in the hillside, partially collapsed and overgrown with clinging vegetation, a wound in the earth's flesh. The area immediately surrounding it had been recently cleared, confirming Alaric's presence here. "Edmund," she called, using his given name, her voice thin and swallowed by the storm's fury. "Alaric, are you here?" For a moment there was no response, only the howling wind and the drumming rain. Then, faintly, from deep within the inky blackness, a hoarse, disbelieving cry. "Elara!" Her heart leapt into her throat, a mixture of terror and immense relief. The tunnel entrance was partially blocked by fallen timbers, but a narrow, treacherous path remained navigable. Taking a deep, shaky breath, Elara squeezed through the opening, the rough stone scraping against her cloak. The air inside was damp and heavy, with the scent of earth and decay, a grim testament to its forgotten purpose. Her lantern cast eerie, dancing shadows on walls that wept moisture, reflecting the cold, ancient darkness. She swallowed her fear, her focus solely on the man waiting in the depths. Following the tunnel cautiously, her lantern beam cutting a shaky path through the gloom, Elara called Alaric's name again. "Here," his voice came, stronger this time, from around a bend in the passage. She found him seated on a fallen beam, his head in his hands completely soaked to the skin. He seemed utterly unaware of, or indifferent to, his physical discomfort. The fearsome Duke, the enigmatic master of Blackwood Keep, was a broken man, lost in the depths of his anguish. He looked up as her light fell upon him, his eyes wide and disbelieving, his face a canvas of raw, vulnerable emotion. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, rising unsteadily to his feet, his voice hoarse, a strange blend of anger and despair. "It isn't safe." "I could say the same to you," Elara replied, relief making her voice sharper than intended. "The entire household has been worried sick. You have been gone for hours, Alaric." He ran a hand through his wet raven hair, looking momentarily lost and disoriented, so unlike his usual composed, controlled self that Alara's heart twisted with profound sadness. This was the man beneath the armor, stripped bare by grief. Elara approached him slowly, as one might a wounded, cornered animal. "Alaric, please, come back to the house. Whatever ghosts you're facing, you don't need to face them alone. Not anymore." He stared at her, the lantern light revealing tracks on his cheeks that might have been rain or tears, or both. "You don't understand," he whispered, his voice thick with 20 years of suppressed pain. "This is where it happened, where I failed him." "Failed who?" Elara asked gently, though she knew the answer. "Frederick." Alaric nodded, his gaze shifting to the collapsed section of tunnel behind him, a dark, gaping wound in the rock. He was just ahead of me when the supports gave way. I heard him call my name just once before the rocks fell. I tried to reach him, Elara, I swear I did. But Father pulled me back. Said it was too dangerous, that we'd lose both sons. His voice broke, a raw, ragged sound. He was right, of course, but in my dreams I still hear Frederick calling. Always calling my name. The burden of his guilt, unspoken for so long, was finally pouring out. Elara moved closer, close enough now that she could feel the chill emanating from his rain-soaked clothes, the tremor in his body. Gently she reached out, her fingers closing around his cold, mud-splattered hand. His skin was like ice, but she held firm. "It wasn't your fault, Alaric," she said, her voice soft yet imbued with unwavering conviction. "You were a boy. There was nothing, absolutely nothing you could have done to stop such a catastrophe." She squeezed his hand. "You were his older brother, yes, but you were scarcely more than a child yourself. And your father was supposed to ensure the mine was safe. The burden of that day, the responsibility for such a terrible accident, it doesn't rest solely on your shoulders." Alaric's eyes met hers, and in their depths, Elara saw raw, naked vulnerability, a pain so profound it stole her breath. He leaned forward until his forehead rested against hers, their damp hair mingling. "I was supposed to protect him," he whispered, the words choked with anguish. "I swore I would. When I received word about Charlotte," Alaric continued, his voice barely audible, his forehead still pressed against hers, "I thought God was punishing me, taking everything I loved because I had failed in my duty, because I was cursed." His words resonated with a deep-seated guilt that had festered for 2 decades. "No," Elara said firmly, her hand tightening on his, offering not just comfort but absolute refutation. "It was not punishment, Alaric. It was a terrible tragedy. A series of terrible tragedies. Accidents, cruel twists of fate, but not divine wrath for your perceived failings. You were not to blame for any of it." She pulled back slightly, forcing him to meet her gaze, her own eyes filled with compassionate reassurance. "The burden of that day, of both those losses, is too heavy for one man to carry. Especially a boy." His eyes searched her face, seeking, perhaps, absolution, a release from the chains of self-condemnation he had worn for so long. And in her unwavering gaze, he found it. A low, ominous rumble shook the tunnel, a deep vibration that resonated through the very earth beneath their feet. Dust and small stones rained down from the ceiling. Alaric, suddenly alert, his protective instincts overriding his personal anguish, straightened abruptly. The raw vulnerability in his eyes snapped back into a look of urgent command. "We need to leave now," he said, his voice sharp with renewed urgency. Taking her hand firmly, he pulled her to her feet. "The supports, they won't hold much longer." His grip was strong, resolute, as he led her quickly, almost dragging her, towards the faint light of the entrance. The air grew thicker with dust, the groaning of stressed timbers now clearly audible behind them. His focus was entirely on getting them to safety, a powerful, primal instinct that pushed aside his grief. The past was threatening to consume them both, and he would not let it. They had nearly reached the opening when a louder, more violent crash sounded behind them. The very ground trembled, followed by a terrifying chorus of groaning, snapping timber. "Run!" Alaric shouted, pushing Elara ahead of him with surprising force, as dust and small rocks began to fall around them in earnest. The air was thick with the choking dust of ancient stone. They burst out into the storm-lashed night, gasping for breath, moments before the tunnel entrance collapsed completely. The ancient mine, the tomb of Frederick and Charlotte, gave up its final breath in a roaring cloud of dust and debris, symbolically sealing off the past forever. The waiting grooms, startled by the sudden collapse, rushed forward. Bethany was already at Elara's side, her face pale but her hands steady, as she helped Elara to a safer distance. Elara and Alaric, both drenched and mud-splattered but unharmed, stood side by side, watching the settling dust. The mine entrance, once a dark maw of painful memories, was now a sealed, impassable mound of rock and earth. A new chapter had begun, ushered in by the violent, cleansing fury of the storm. Alaric stared at the now sealed mine entrance, his chest heaving, an expression of stunned disbelief on his face. "It's gone," he said hoarsely, the words barely a whisper against the receding wind. "After all these years—" Elara, still clutching his hand, squeezed it gently. "Perhaps it's time," she murmured, "time to let the past rest." He turned to her then, his blue eyes searching her face with a raw wonder that made her heart ache. The formidable mask was gone, replaced by an open, vulnerable gaze. "You came for me," he said, his voice thick with emotion, tinged with incredulity. "Into the dark, into danger." "Of course I did," she replied simply, her own voice steady. "You're my husband." Something shifted in his expression, the last of his carefully constructed walls crumbling away, revealing a depth of emotion she had never dared to hope for. With gentle reverence, he raised his free hand to her cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of her jaw. "Elara Radcliffe," he said softly, her married name sounding like a prayer on his lips, laden with profound gratitude. "What have I done to deserve you?" Before Elara could answer, before she could articulate the tumultuous emotions swirling within her, Alaric lowered his head. His lips met hers, not in the formal, polite brush of their wedding day, but in a kiss of genuine, unbridled emotion. It was a kiss of gratitude, of awakening tenderness, of a profound relief that transcended words. It was a promise, a question, a desperate hope, all rolled into one. An unexpected warmth bloomed through Elara's frozen limbs, spreading through her entire being, melting away years of fear and doubt. His arms came around her, pulling her close, and she responded without hesitation, pouring all her burgeoning affection into the embrace. This was their first true kiss, the beginning of something real and deeply felt. When they finally parted, their breath mingling in the cold, damp air, Alaric pressed his forehead to hers, his eyes still holding hers with an intensity that spoke volumes. The storm was now merely a whisper, the rain a gentle drizzle. "Let's go home," he whispered, the words holding a new, deeper meaning. As they rode back to Blackwood Keep together, the storm gradually subsiding around them, the moon breaking through the scattering clouds, Elara realized that for the first time since her arrival, she truly was going home. Not to an imposing mansion filled with shadows and secrets, not to a gilded cage of duty and obligation, but to a place where understanding had finally taken root, and where healing had truly begun. The cold dread that had clung to her like a shroud for so long was replaced by a quiet, dawning happiness. And beside her rode not the fearsome Duke of Blackwood, the enigmatic monster whispered about in terrified tones throughout London society, but Alaric. A man with wounds and regrets like any other, yes, but also a man capable of immense kindness, profound vulnerability, and perhaps, with time, an enduring love. He still held her hand, his fingers intertwined with hers, a silent testament to the bond that had been forged in the dark, dangerous depths of the old mine. Together, she thought, looking at their joined hands. Always. Spring arrived at Blackwood Keep with a gentle sigh, sweeping away the last vestiges of winter's chill and the heavy shadows of the past. The estate seemed to breathe more freely now, as if the dramatic collapse of the mine entrance had indeed allowed old ghosts to rest at last, releasing a pent-up energy that vibrated through the very stones of the ancient house. Alaric, no longer bound by the silent burden of his grief, moved with a newfound purpose. He ordered the south wing renovations accelerated, transforming what had been a neglected reminder of tragedy into bright, airy spaces filled with light, each window thrown open to the nascent warmth of the sun. Elara watched, a quiet satisfaction blossoming in her heart, as the once forbidden wing slowly shed its somber shroud. The formidable facade of the Duke of Blackwood remained for business, ensuring the tenants and his associates still accorded him the respect his title demanded. Yet, in private, With Elara, a profoundly different man emerged. The stern lines of his face softened when he smiled, which he did with increasing frequency, a slow, tender curving of his lips that melted Elara's heart. His laugh, when she first heard it echoing through the halls, had startled them both with its rusty disuse, a sound long forgotten. But soon it became a sound she treasured, a melody of pure joy that filled the once silent keep. Elara found herself often watching him, delighting in these unguarded moments that revealed the man beneath the Duke's armor. Their evenings were now spent together by choice rather than obligation, a quiet ritual that deepened their companionship and intimacy. Sometimes they would sit by the roaring fire in the library, reading aloud to each other from ancient texts or newly acquired novels. Sometimes Elara would play the pianoforte in the music room, its notes echoing softly through the revitalized space, while Alaric listened with closed eyes, his posture relaxed, a rare peace settling upon his features. And often they simply talked about books they'd read, about the estate's future, about their childhoods, and with growing vulnerability, about their hopes and dreams for the years to come. Alaric, true to his burgeoning trust in her, began involving Elara in the intricate business of running Blackwood Keep. He showed her estate accounts, explained management decisions regarding crops and tenants, and listened intently to her perspective, valuing her input in a way that made her feel truly partnered, rather than merely decorative. "You have a good mind for figures," he remarked one afternoon, as they reviewed the quarterly accounts together, a rare compliment that warmed Elara deeply. "Better than mine, in truth." Elara smiled, pleased. "My father never bothered to teach me such things. He assumed I would marry someone who would handle all financial matters." Alaric's mouth quirked in a half-smile, a hint of his old bitterness, now softened by affection. "And instead, you married me, who insists on boring you with ledgers and crop rotations." "I find it fascinating, not boring," Elara corrected him gently, her hand reaching across the desk to cover his. "This is our home, Alaric, our responsibility. I want to understand it." The word "our" hung between them, weighted with a meaning far beyond mere possession. Alaric's thumb stroked the back of her hand, his gaze meeting hers. "I never expected to share these burdens," he said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. "I had grown accustomed to carrying them alone." "You don't have to anymore," Elara promised. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Alaric came to her chamber not merely to bid her good night, but to stay. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls as their coming together unfolded. It was tender, hesitant at first, a delicate exploration as they learned each other's unspoken language, the rhythm of shared breaths and gentle touches. Then, as trust deepened and old fears receded, it grew in passion, a profound intimacy born not of obligation, but of a love hard-won and deeply cherished. Afterward, as Elara lay nestled in the strong, secure circle of her husband's arms, she marveled at how far they had come from that first fearful night. "What are you thinking?" Alaric murmured against her hair, his voice a low rumble that resonated through her. Elara smiled in the darkness, a quiet, profound joy blooming in her chest. "I was remembering our wedding night, when you asked if I was afraid of you." His arms tightened slightly around her. "I saw such terror in your eyes. It wounded me, though I had no right to feel wounded when I had given you every reason to fear." "Not you," Elara corrected gently, turning her head to look up at him. "Your reputation, the rumors." "But the man who asked that question, who gave me choice when he could have demanded his rights. I think I began to fall in love with him in that moment, though I didn't recognize it then." Alaric went very still, his gaze fixed on her face in the moonlight. "Love," he echoed, the words sounding foreign, almost fragile on his tongue. Elara's heart raced as she realized what she had admitted. "Yes," she said softly, gathering her courage. "I love you, Alaric, not because you remind me of anyone else, or because you're the Duke of Blackwood, but because you're you, stubborn and honorable and kind, beneath all that formidable armor." Alaric shifted, propping himself up to look down at her face in the moonlight that filtered through the curtains. His expression was one of wonder and disbelief, as if he could barely comprehend her words. "I never thought to hear those words again," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Never thought to feel worthy of them." "You are," Elara insisted, reaching up to touch his cheek, her fingers tracing the scar that bisected his eyebrow. "So worthy." He turned his head slightly, pressing a kiss into her palm, a gesture of profound humility and gratitude that spoke volumes. "When I first saw you at that ball 2 seasons ago," Alaric began, his voice a low murmur, "something about you called to me. Yes, there was a resemblance to Charlotte. I won't deny that drew my eye initially, but it was your spirit that truly held my attention." He paused, tracing the curve of her cheek with gentle fingers, his gaze distant, recalling the past. "The way you laughed with genuine delight at your companion's jest, the kindness you showed to an elderly dowager whom others had abandoned in favor of more exciting company. I watched you refuse 3 dancing partners without appearing unkind, then accept the 4th, a shy young man others had overlooked. I saw intelligence in your eyes when you discussed poetry with the ambassador's wife, while other young ladies spoke only of ribbons and gossip. You noticed all that?" Elara asked, amazed, her heart swelling with warmth. Alaric nodded. "I noticed everything about you. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I found myself thinking of a future that wasn't merely duty and obligation. It terrified me." "So, you arranged our marriage without meeting me properly," Elara prompted, her tone now curious rather than accusatory, understanding dawning fully. A rueful smile, almost self-deprecating, crossed his lips. "I convinced myself it was for the best, that a formal arrangement would protect us both from complications. In truth, I was a coward. I feared your rejection if you knew the man behind the title, the broken man so many whispered about." "Not broken," Elara corrected, lifting herself slightly to kiss him softly. "Just wounded and healing now, I think." "Because of you," Alaric murmured against her lips, his voice husky with emotion. "My brave, beautiful Duchess, who faced down her fears and mine." He drew back slightly, his expression suddenly serious, his blue eyes holding hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "I love you, Elara. I should have told you weeks ago, but the words felt presumptuous somehow, as if I had no right to them after bringing you here under such circumstances." "Say them again," Elara requested, joy blooming in her chest, her own voice barely a whisper. "I love you," Alaric repeated, his voice stronger now, "with all that I am, all that I have been, and all that I might become with you beside me." They sealed this declaration with a kiss that promised a future neither had dared to imagine when they first met at the altar. A future built on understanding, respect, and love, freely given rather than coerced or assumed. Autumn came to Blackwood, painting the sprawling estate in glorious russets and golds. The harvest was bountiful, the tenants prosperous and content, under Alaric's increasingly fair and forward-thinking management. Improvements, many of them suggested by Elara herself. A small school for the tenants, children, a clinic staffed by a visiting physician who came weekly, were being implemented with enthusiasm. Blackwood Keep, once a symbol of sorrow, was slowly but surely becoming a beacon of progress and community, its foundations now rooted in shared vision and mutual respect. Blackwood Hall itself had undergone a metamorphosis. Rooms long closed to the light were opened and refreshed, their dusty silence replaced by the murmur of conversation and the rustle of daily life. Laughter, once a rare and startling sound, could often be heard echoing through corridors that had known only hushed whispers for decades. The staff, too, had thawed considerably toward their new Duchess, particularly after witnessing the profound change in their master. Mrs. Elara Winters, usually so severe, actually smiled on occasion, and even Simmons, the stoic butler, had been known to unbend enough to share stories of Alaric's boyhood pranks with Elara when his master was not present. It was on a crisp October morning when the final piece of healing began to fall into place. Elara had been feeling unwell for several days, nothing serious, just an unusual fatigue and a curious sensitivity to certain scents. When she mentioned it casually to Mrs. Elara Winters, the housekeeper's knowing look sent a thrill of possibility, both nervous and exhilarating through her. It was a suspicion too wonderful, too fragile to voice aloud, but the unspoken question hung in the air between them. The local physician, Dr. Harrison, confirmed her suspicions during his weekly visit to the estate clinic. Elara was indeed with child, Alaric's child, due to arrive in the early spring. A profound sense of destiny settled over her as she absorbed the news. Their love, born from tragedy and fear, was now blossoming into new life. She waited until that evening to share the news, after they had dined and retired to the library for their customary quiet time together. Alaric was reading correspondence by the fire, while Elara ostensibly worked on an embroidery piece, though her thoughts were far from the delicate stitches. "Alaric," she began, setting aside her needlework, her voice trembling slightly with nervousness and excitement. "I visited Dr. Harrison today." Her husband looked up immediately, concern crossing his features. "Are you unwell? You've seemed tired lately." "Not unwell. No." Elara smiled, a radiant, nervous joy in her eyes. "Quite the opposite, in fact. Dr. Harrison confirms that we are to have a child in the spring." Alaric went perfectly still, the letter in his hand forgotten. "A child," he repeated, as if the words were in a foreign tongue he was struggling to translate. Elara nodded, suddenly uncertain of his reaction. "Are you pleased?" For a moment, Alaric didn't move. Then the letter fell from his fingers as he crossed the room in 2 long strides, kneeling before her chair to take her hands in his. "Pleased," he echoed, his voice rough with emotion, his blue eyes shimmering. "Elara, you have given me back my life, my heart, my ability to look forward rather than backward. And now you offer the greatest gift imaginable." His hands moved to frame her face with exquisite tenderness. "Yes, I am pleased, I am humbled. I am terrified and exhilarated in equal measure." Relief washed through Elara, warm and profound. "I was afraid you might worry, given everything." Elara confessed, her voice soft. Understanding dawned in Alaric's eyes. "You thought I might fear history repeating itself." She nodded. "My love," Alaric said solemnly, his hand moving gently to rest over her still flat stomach. "The tragedies of the past have shaped us, but they need not define our future. This child will be born into a home filled with love. Not the cold duty I knew growing up, nor the fear that greeted you when you first arrived." He looked up at her, his gaze unwavering. "This child will know their father as a man who makes mistakes but strives to be better, who values kindness over power, honesty over pretense, who loves their mother with his entire being." Tears sprang to Elara's eyes at the beauty of this vision. "And they will know their mother as a woman who believes in second chances, who sees the truth beneath facades, who never stopped hoping for happiness, even when it seemed impossible." Alaric rose, drawing Elara to her feet and into his embrace. "We will build this future together," he promised. "Day by day, choice by choice." The winter months passed in quiet contentment as Elara's condition became increasingly evident. Alaric proved to be an attentive, if sometimes overly protective, husband. He insisted on moving their bedchambers to the ground floor to spare Elara the stairs, commissioned a special carriage with extra padding for her rare journeys to the village, and even learned to make her favorite tea when morning sickness plagued her early weeks. Their evenings remained devoted to each other, though now often included planning for the child's arrival, a joyful anticipation that filled the once somber halls with a new, vibrant energy. Alaric surprised Elara by revealing a hidden talent for woodworking, spending hours in the estate workshop crafting a cradle of exquisite design. "My grandfather taught me," he explained when she marveled at his skill. "He believed a duke should know how to work with his hands as well as his mind." The south wing, once forbidden and shrouded in painful memories, was transformed into a cheerful nursery suite. Walls that had witnessed tragedy now gleamed with fresh paint in soft, welcoming colors. Windows that had been shuttered for decades now stood open to sunlight and fresh air. "It feels right," Alaric said as they stood together in the completed nursery one evening, his arms solid and secure around her expanding waistline, "to bring new life to this part of the house, to reclaim it from the shadows." Elara leaned against him, Frederick would approve, I think." "Yes," Alaric agreed softly, "and Charlotte, too." It was the first time he had spoken Charlotte's name without pain shadowing his features. Another healing, another step forward. With late winter came unexpected news from London. Alaric's distant cousin, Lord Richard Caldwell, had died suddenly, leaving his young daughter Eleanor orphaned. As her nearest relative, Alaric was named guardian in the will. "She's only 6, Alaric told Elara after receiving the solicitor's letter, a frown creasing his brow. "I've never even met her." "Then she must come to Blackwood," Elara said without hesitation, her compassion immediate and unwavering. No child should be alone in their grief. Alaric's face softened with love and gratitude. "You would welcome her now, with the baby coming so soon?" "Of course," Elara replied, her resolute expression leaving no room for doubt. "She's family, Alaric." 2 weeks later, a carriage crunched on the gravel drive of Blackwood Keep, delivering its young passenger. Eleanor Caldwell, a small, solemn-faced girl of 6, stepped out, clutching a worn rag doll to her chest. Her enormous brown eyes, shadowed with recent grief, regarded the massive, once fearsome keep and her new guardians, Elara and Alaric, with weary uncertainty. Elara's heart went out to the child immediately, recognizing, in Eleanor's reserved demeanor, the same defensive wall that Alaric had built around his own heart for so long. To everyone's surprise, it was Alaric who broke through the child's reserve first. Kneeling, despite his usual dignified posture, to address her at eye level, he spoke to her not with condescension, but with simple, profound honesty. "I know what it is to lose those you love, Eleanor," he told her, his voice a gentle rumble. "Blackwood Keep was a cold place when I was a boy, but it isn't anymore. And while we can never replace your father, we would like to offer you a home here if you'll have us." Eleanor studied him carefully with the unnerving directness of childhood, her small hand tightening on her doll. "Can I have a pony?" she asked finally, her voice a reedy whisper. Alaric's startled laugh, genuine and warm, echoed through the cavernous entrance hall, a sound Elara now treasured above all others. It was the first time she had seen such unbridled joy on his face for something so simple. "Yes," he replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I believe that could certainly be arranged." Eleanor's lips curved into a slight, almost imperceptible smile, the first crack in her carefully constructed defenses. A dawning trust, tentative but real, began to form between the once-feared Duke and the wary orphan. The addition of Eleanor to their household brought an unexpected, profound joy in the final weeks before the baby's arrival. Her presence seemed to complete something in Alaric, allowing him to revisit aspects of childhood through her eyes, this time with warmth and affection rather than the cold duty he had known. Elara would often watch, her heart swelling with a happiness she had never dared to imagine when she first arrived at Blackwood Keep as a frightened bride, as Alaric, shedding his ducal dignity, taught Eleanor to ride her promised pony. Their laughter would drift up from the formal gardens, a melody of pure joy that chased away any lingering shadows. The following spring, as wildflowers bloomed across the Blackwood estate and birds returned to build nests in the awakening trees, Elara gave birth to twins in her ground-floor bedchamber, a boy with his father's raven hair, and a girl with her mother's copper tresses. Alaric, who had paced anxiously throughout the long hours of labor, was overcome with emotion when the midwife finally placed his children, warm and squalling, in his arms. Tears tracked paths down his usually stoic face as he gazed at the tiny, perfect beings. "My children," he choked out, his voice thick with a love he had once believed he would never feel. "Frederick," he suggested tentatively, looking to Elara for approval. "And Charlotte." Elara, tired but radiant, smiled from the bed, understanding the profound, healing symbolism of these names. They were not merely names, but an embrace of the past, a promise of a future where grief could coexist with joy. Frederick and Charlotte. She agreed softly, reaching out a hand to touch her husband's tear-streaked cheek. To honor the past while embracing our future." Alaric placed the infants gently beside their mother, then sat on the edge of the bed, taking Elara's hand, his gaze filled with a mixture of reverence and awe. "When you first came to Blackwood Keep," he reminded her, his voice rough with emotion, "you asked if I feared that particular obligation of marriage. I asked you, are you afraid?" His blue eyes, now clear and full of an enduring love, held hers. "Now I must ask you again, my love. After all these years, after all we've built together, are you afraid?" Elara looked from her husband to their newborn children, nestled safely beside her, and back again to the man who had faced his own monsters to become her greatest comfort. Her heart was so full it felt it might burst with gratitude and peace. "No," she answered truthfully, her voice unwavering. "Not of anything, as long as we face it together." Alaric leaned down to kiss her forehead, then each child's tiny brow. "Together," he echoed, "always." Years passed, and the once fearsome Duke of Blackwood became known throughout the county, not for his forbidding demeanor, but for his unwavering fairness, his progressive estate management, and his evident devotion to his family. The whispers of the "cursed lord" faded, replaced by stories of a man who cared deeply for his tenants, who invested in his lands, and who brought prosperity and peace wherever he went. His reputation, once built on fear, was now founded on respect and admiration, a legacy forged from his own profound transformation. Blackwood Keep itself underwent a metamorphosis that mirrored its masters. Once whispered about as a place of shadows and secrets, it bloomed into a vibrant center of community. Harvest festivals for the tenants filled the south lawn with laughter and music, and its magnificent gardens were open to visitors on summer weekends. The grand, echoing halls, which had known only hushed whispers for decades, now resonated with the joyful sounds of children at play and the convivial chatter of guests. The haunted mansion had found its heartbeat again, a testament to the love that had reclaimed its very foundations. Eleanor, the solemn orphan, grew into a confident young woman, her enormous brown eyes now sparkling with intelligence and determination. She possessed a quick wit and an easy, infectious laugh that brought joy to all who knew her. She adored her younger cousins, as she called the twins, appointing herself their fierce protector and enthusiastic playmate with solemn responsibility. Her presence was a constant reminder of the capacity for love and acceptance that had blossomed within the keep, a living testament to the family's journey. In time, Alaric formally adopted Eleanor as his daughter, not by obligation, but by choice, and a deep, abiding affection that had grown between them. It was a heartfelt ceremony in his study, witnessed by Elara, a quiet confirmation of the bond that had long been evident. From that moment on, Eleanor became more than a ward. She became family in every sense, her name etched into the Radcliffe lineage, securing her place for generations to come. Frederick and Charlotte, the twins, flourished under the watchful, loving care of parents who had learned, through their own arduous journey, the invaluable lessons of honesty, trust, and second chances. Alaric proved to be a far different father than the distant, exacting one he had known. He was present, affectionate, and utterly devoted, willing to set aside ducal dignity to crawl on the floor with his children, build towering castles from blocks, or tell bedtime stories with theatrical voices that delighted his rapt audience. Elara often found herself smiling, watching him, knowing he was healing old wounds in his heart with every loving interaction. On the twins' 5th birthday, as the family gathered on the south lawn for a vibrant celebration that included tenants, children, and village families alike, Elara found herself watching Alaric. He was kneeling between Frederick and Charlotte, helping them feed carrots to a gentle pony, while Eleanor, now a graceful girl of 11, supervised with exaggerated importance. His head was thrown back in laughter at something one of the children had said, the sound carrying across the lawn, free, unguarded, and utterly joyful. How different from the stern, enigmatic Duke who had awaited her at the altar. How miraculous the transformation from feared lord to beloved husband and father. Mrs. Melara Winters appeared at Elara's side, her once severe face now softened by the contentment of seeing Blackwood Keep restored to life. "You've done well, Your Grace," the housekeeper said, her gaze following Elara's to Alaric and the children. Elara smiled, reaching out to gently squeeze Mrs. Milara's hand. "We've done well together," she corrected softly, her eyes sweeping across the bustling, happy scene. "All of us." Mrs. Milara simply nodded, a rare, genuine smile gracing her lips, acknowledging the truth in Elara's words. The transformation of Blackwood Keep, and indeed of its Duke, had been a collective effort, a testament to the power of shared purpose and enduring hope. That evening, after the celebrations had ended and the children were tucked into their beds, Alaric found Elara in their private sitting room, gazing out at the starlit gardens. He came to stand behind her, his arms encircling her waist, drawing her back against his chest. "Happy," he murmured against her hair. Elara leaned into his embrace, a soft sigh escaping her lips. "Beyond measure," she replied. "And you?" His arms tightened slightly. "I never knew such happiness was possible," Alaric admitted, his voice low and rich with emotion. "When you first came to Blackwood Keep, I was a man half alive, dwelling in shadows, afraid to hope for more than duty and obligation." He gently turned her to face him, his loving gaze holding hers. "You changed everything, Elara," he said, his voice imbued with profound gratitude. "With your courage, your compassion, your willingness to see beyond my walls and into the broken man beneath. You brought light back to this house, and to me." His thumb traced the curve of her cheek, a gesture of deep tenderness. "You saved me. We changed each other." Elara corrected gently, reaching up to trace the lines of his face, which were no longer severe, but softened by years of smiles and shared laughter. "That's what love does, I think. It transforms us, not into different people entirely, but into better versions of ourselves. It allows us to shed the burdens we once carried alone and embrace a future we build together." Alaric smiled, the expression now natural and frequent, where once it had been a rare and guarded sight. "Do you remember the question I asked you on our wedding night?" he asked, his blue eyes holding hers with a familiar yet now infinitely warmer intensity. Elara's heart quickened at the memory, that pivotal moment of vulnerability and unexpected choice. "Are you afraid?" she quoted softly. "And now I ask you again," Alaric said, his voice a quiet promise that echoed through the peaceful room. "After all these years, after all we've built together, this family, this home, this life, are you afraid?" Elara rose on tiptoe to press her lips to his, pouring into the kiss all the love and gratitude and joy of their shared journey. It was a kiss that spoke of triumph over fear, of unwavering trust, and of a future secured by an unbreakable bond. "Not of anything," she whispered against his mouth, her voice firm and full of conviction. "Not with you beside me." Their embrace deepened, sealing this declaration, a testament to the profound transformation they had undergone, both individually and together. In the nursery above, Frederick and Charlotte slept peacefully in their beautifully crafted cradle, untroubled by the ghosts that had once haunted Blackwood Keep. Soft moonlight streamed through the open windows, bathing the cheerful room in a gentle glow. No shadows stirred, no haunting melodies echoed. Only the quiet, steady breathing of innocent children filled the air, a testament to the generational healing that had begun. In the gardens below, spring flowers bloomed in vibrant profusion, where once shadows had dominated the ancient stone. The air was sweet with their perfume, carried on a gentle breeze. Blackwood Keep stood, majestic and welcoming, no longer a monument to tragedy, but a living, breathing testament to the enduring power of love, courage, and the beautiful, unexpected twists of fate that allow even the most wounded hearts to find peace, joy, and a future reclaimed.